So what is Kanban? There's the Kanban with a small k, and there's Kanban with a capital K, which is actually a Kanban method. Back in the late 1940s, Toyota, they started studying supermarkets, and they thought that the process in which they managed the items being placed on their store shelf could be something that they could mimic on their factory floors, as they would produce parts and assemble them into cars. That's basically where Kanban started, and I'm referring to the small k Kanban, the machine parts, the car parts that they would produce and later on assemble to become cars. Each card has a label, it has a card on it. The card specifies what parts are in it and in what quantities, right? Now these cards are then delivered to areas in their factory floors so that they can be used to assemble the car. Now as soon as the parts inside the cart are depleted and need replenishment, what they do is that they take the card off of that cart and send it back, of which someone sorts it out, figures out what parts are needed, what items, how much, and in what place, and they start the manufacturing of those parts. So that sort of simplified their demand and supply balancing act. Now you might be thinking, well, gee, Kanban is just used in manufacturing. It's not really, it's something that people don't understand. In fact, Kanban is probably more visible than we think. Who's been to a fast food chain? Have you ever seen this shelf behind the counter? Have you noticed? Whenever you order a burger, they would get it off that, right? That is sort of a form of Kanban. Each column has a specific type of food item. It shows that if the food items on a particular column get depleted, they will replenish. It's as simple as that. So no high-tech solution, a simple shelf like that works for them. In fact, they went beyond that because they figured they optimized their system so much so that they can deliver what you need in very, very short amount of time. So they don't have to buffer anymore. They make it as you order. Right? But prior to that, they actually use some sort of Kanban system. So if you're thinking Kanban is something that's quite secret in the manufacturing world or even in the software world, it's actually present in our day-to-day lives. The word Kanban literally means signal cards. I would read those Chinese characters as Kanban. It's literally referring to you're looking at a card or a sample. So a Kanban system, a system that uses these signal cards, is basically a visual process management system that tells what to produce, when to produce it, and how much to produce. This is very much like how Toyota learned from its supermarket method on what to produce, when to produce, and how much. Let's get into the capital K, which is a method for process improvement as formulated by David Anderson. It uses a work-in-process limited pull system. So that's the formal definition of Kanban. So let me summarize that a bit, a lot of words. But really, the important points to take away with the Kanban method is this. It uses a pull system, it limits work in process, and exposes the system operation or problems of your system operation. So that is to summarize what the Kanban method is really about. So with those 3 points, we'll be asking, why use a pull system? Why not push? Why pull? Why would you want to limit work in process? Don't you want to work as many items as you can to increase throughput? Why? Why expose the process to all participants to see? Isn't this just overhead of having to update so many boards and status reports and Excel spreadsheets and graphs and whatnot? Why make it visible? explain that, let me share with you what push and pull systems are. A push system basically is a process management system where items are produced based on forecasts. So basically, you try to predict how much the consumption will be. So it's quite simple. So manufacturing firms kind of use sometimes a lot of factors, things like weather. If it's the rainy season, chances are you can produce more umbrellas, raincoats, and boots and whatnot. If it's the summertime and it's hot, then you'll be producing more liquids-based products, juices, refreshments, and maybe cold, things like that. So this is what a typical push system does. In other words, it says, make all we can just in case. Again, it's all based on forecasts. So you've got to have a very good forecasting system to be able to effectively use a push type of system. On the other hand, the pull system is a system whereby items are actually produced only when there is a need, only when there's something that needs to be replaced, because that something has been consumed. That's a pull system. So in other words, make what's needed when we need it. In other words, that's what we call just in time. So in the case of Kanban, it encourages a pull system, as illustrated here, as you can see. As soon as an item from the shelf is consumed, it gives the producer a signal that they have to fill that open slot. That's simple. That's how pull systems are. Now, in the case of Kanban method applied to software development, it works because what it does is that it forces you to balance demand against throughput. You have a demand for software features. That demand keeps on coming, which is good business. Otherwise, what would you be building, right? But then you have to balance that with throughput. You can't keep on coming up with new features to produce and develop, if you know those features won't be developed by your team fast enough. So it forces you to balance your demand against the team's throughput. In other words, the team's capability to get that feature from inception all the way to being done. It also reduces waste, or potentially eliminating it. Now, what is waste in this case? Waste will come in the form of features that have been spec'd out but never ever get developed. Perhaps you even have features that stay for a long time in a to-do list because your team is incapable of getting it done, not even getting it started. So by limiting your demand and understanding how much throughput you can have, you're now forced to prioritize what features you want the team to develop. Now, others might be thinking, well, I don't trust my team that much. Chances are they're just sandbagging. That's why they're not pulling enough work items from the queue. But let me sort of give you a different area of thought. And I'm borrowing a quote from Steve Jobs. He says here, if you're working on something exciting that you really care about, you don't have to be pushed. The vision pulls you in. In other words, if you think that your team is sandbagging, perhaps another area you might want to look at is the team's motivation. The next concept I'd like to talk about is about limiting WIP, or work in process. To improve cycle time, you've only got two options. Increase your throughput, or you could also reduce your WIP, work in process. According to David Anderson, there is causation between the quantity of WIP and average lead time or cycle time, and that relationship is linear. Now, here's the catch. He observes that longer lead times seem to be associated with significantly poorer quality. In fact, an approximately 6.5 times increase in average lead time resulted in a greater than 30-fold increase in initial defects. Now, there are a lot of discussion going on as to why that is the case. It's the concept of multitasking. I think you've experienced the case where you kind of keep on switching from one work item to the next, to the next, to the next, and then you come back to that work item you're working on. Thus, the average time it takes for you to complete that item or feature, instead of taking you hours or days, it becomes weeks. And that is basically what we call the myth of multitasking. Because people think that, hey, have the multitask, you can have those things get done faster, earlier. But then again, I think it's working in the opposite direction. Lastly is about making the process visible, displaying for everyone to see. Now, in the work of software engineering, our work is inherently invisible. And why does Kanban method want to make it visible? Because it allows everyone to see the system or the bottlenecks, if there's any, and it also allows your team to self-organize much, much earlier, rather than later, or by management orders. So they could self-organize much, much better. Basically, just to summarize, hopefully I've explained to you and shared with you my thoughts on why Kanban works, because it uses a full system to balance your demand against your throughput and eliminate waste. It limits work in process because having more work in process lowers your quality because it lengthens average lead time. And it works because it exposes your process and the problems within it much, much better than what other methods are currently doing. So hopefully with those 3 points, you could give Kanban a try. Or if you don't want to use Kanban, perhaps these ideas from Kanban can be useful to your own Agile.